I just wish to speak very briefly on this. I appreciate it's 10:30 at night, but there are a lot of, I think, firefighters around the country who have waited a very long time for this, so I think we in this House can wait a couple of minutes longer. I think it's a lot of measures which are long overdue are included in this social welfare bill, indeed. There are also a lot of reforming measures in it, but I think this is a particularly important measure, given the fact that the great majority of fire services across rural Ireland are provided by retained firefighters. And up to now, they have effectively been discriminated against because of their willingness to go out and work for their communities, to serve their communities, in many instances to put their lives on the line for their communities. I'm very glad that once this bill is finally enacted, that will no longer be the case, and that they will be able to receive unemployment assistance for days in which they're not called out and they're not in receipt of a call-out fee. I think this is the very least that they can expect for the very valuable service which they provide to our state and to our communities. And on that basis, I greatly welcome the inclusion of this by Minister Burton. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank the deputies who have welcomed the final, if you like, sorting out at last of this particular difficulty for a group of people who are very important to Irish society. There are about 2,000 people employed as retained firefighters, and it's estimated that approximately 800 part-time firefighters are also in receipt of a job seekers payment. And I have to say I'm very grateful to a number of the deputies in the House who approached me in relation to this matter, including Deputy McNamara and Deputy O'Snoddick shortly after I became Minister in relation to specific cases. So I have to say it took some time, I think, to find an approach that would actually work for the particular circumstances of the workers involved. But they do a vitally important public service to local communities. And it's important to know that while we associate retained firefighters mainly with rural areas, there are also quite a lot of part-time firemen in the fringes of different urban areas as well. So they're entitled, retained firefighters are entitled to a job seekers payment in respect of days that they are engaged in firefighting or training. They are, however, required to satisfy the statutory conditions for the receipt of a job seekers payment of being available for and genuinely seeking work. Any person who fails to satisfy these conditions is not entitled to a job seekers payment. So, taking account of the unusual circumstances of retained fire personnel, a departmental group was established to examine the position of these workers vis-à-vis job seekers benefit and job seekers allowance. So the current practice of dealing with retained firefighters had its roots in an administrative decision that was apparently made in 1972 to disregard any days of firefighting or training when determining their entitlement to job seekers benefit, JB or job seekers allowance. On foot of the work of the working group, I've advanced the position within the two job seekers scheme to cater for retained firefighters, and this is important on a legislative basis. The bill and associated regulations will advance the necessary legislative amendments to the job seekers schemes, thereby putting the current administrative treatment of retained firefighters on a statutory basis. The legislation will allow retained firefighters a reasonable and fair level of access to the scheme in the future. The revised arrangements will take effect from commencement of the Act and will not apply to previous disallowances made in respect of retained fire personnel. Generally, such disallowances were made having regard to the legislative provisions applying at the time of the decisions. The legislative package will exempt retained firefighters from having to satisfy the substantial loss of employment or sub-loss rule under JB. In addition, retained firefighters will be exempt from suffering a loss of a day of job seekers payment for every day of employment firefighting. This will mean that any days of employment as a firefighter will not reduce the individual's weekly job seekers entitlement other than by application of means in job seekers allowance. So if people work 5 days as a firefighter, they may also have an entitlement to receive 5 days of JB. However, if they have other employment aside from firefighting, then their job seekers entitlement will reduce for days worked in their non-firefighting job. Finally, the legislation also provides that when a retained firefighter is on call for the purposes of JB and JA, this will not result in a disallowance on the grounds of availability, and that was a big issue in different areas of the country. These legislative amendments, if commenced, will only apply to retained firefighters, and obviously they don't apply to full-time firefighters. I'm not in a position to accept the Deputy's proposed amendment.
Thank you, Minister.